Welcome to another inspirational message from Chowdean Community Church, Gateshead. For more information about Chowdean, visit www.chowdean.org.uk. We hope you enjoy the podcast.
It's good to be standing here this morning on such a lovely sunny day, but it's quite a difficult subject that I've got. It's called a beautiful act and an act of betrayal. So let me start this morning by asking you a question. What makes things beautiful? What makes things beautiful? What makes someone beautiful? Well, on the screen behind me, hopefully, there's some works of art going to come up. Now, one of them is very, very famous, the Mona Lisa in the top left-hand corner. Now, James has actually been to the Louvre in Paris and seen this picture, and one of the things that struck him the most was the fact that it's actually very small. It's about yay big. I think in new money, that's 77 by 55 centimetres. About so big, but it actually was quite small. I must admit, I always thought it was so big, but it's actually quite small. What struck him was the fact that it was small, but also the fact that people were queuing for absolutely ages to see it, himself included. And in doing so, they missed out on something. They missed out on seeing some of the other beautiful paintings and some of the very famous French tapestries. Now, what about the other paintings that are up there? Some of them are quite interesting, some conventional, and some actually quite weird. But everyone has a different view. Everyone has a different view on what makes something beautiful. You might like classic, you might like modern. I suppose it all depends on your take on things, doesn't it? Well, this morning, I want us to look at what God thinks is beautiful. What does God think is beautiful? Well, the answer can be found very clearly in the chapter that we are going to be looking at this morning. It can be found in Mark chapter 14, verses 1 to 11. So if you've got your Bible with you, you might like to follow, or you can follow on the screen behind me. Mark chapter 14. Now the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or the people may riot. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them at any time, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money. So he watched for an opportunity to hand him over. Now, I have to admit that I found the subject this week very hard to tackle. When I was given the subject, a beautiful act and an act of betrayal, I did wonder what on earth I was going to speak on. Now, I don't know about the other speakers on the team here, But when the titles or the subjects are sent round, I always have a good look at what everybody else has been given. You know, it's like human nature. And there are times when I think, I'm glad I haven't got that subject. Anybody here from the speaking team who can recognise that sentiment? Now, the reason I found it so difficult this week is because the subject is very hard-hitting. Just have another look at that title. A beautiful act and an act of betrayal. I also found, on a personal level, I've always struggled with the concept of beauty. What makes something beautiful? What makes someone beautiful? I think that's probably mainly because I've had many years of comments about my weight and the way I look. And I haven't got a lot of confidence in myself as a result of that. Now, I know some people here would understand what I'm saying. I've always compared myself to other people, and I've always come up feeling very inferior, very lacking, in fact. But I also found that in preparing this, I had to take a good, hard look at my own heart and then challenge myself on what I found. So with all that in mind, let's turn our attention to the story we've just read together. I think we need to set the scene here. The story takes place in Simon the leper's house. The disciples are all together. They're chilling out. They're having a bit of chill time. Jesus is reclining. They're having a good time together. Now, Mark has concentrated very much on the important aspects of the story, but he has left out some details. And these details, actually, we can fill in from having a look at the other Gospels where the same story is recounted. And from the other Gospels, we actually know that the woman who came in very quietly and demurely and poured the oil over him was, in fact, Mary of Bethany. Now, Mary of Bethany was the sister of Martha and Lazarus, and she's not to be confused with Mary Magdalene, who is a completely different character altogether. Now, the other Gospels record the timing of this incident a bit differently to Mark. Mark says that this happened 2 days before the Passover and the festival unleavened bread, but the other Gospels said it happened at a different time. But I've looked at this, and most of the learned scholars conclude that actually it doesn't really matter about the timing, that Mark only put this at a different time because he thought it made the chronology of events flow a bit better. It doesn't really make any difference to the story itself and what the importance of it. What everyone is agreed, though, is that there are two central characters here. One is Mary of Bethany, and the other Judas of Iscariot. However, these two people were complete opposites. Apart from the obvious difference of gender, there probably wasn't a lot to tell them apart on the surface. Both hung around with Jesus and would have been classed as a friend or a follower. They were really close to him. On the outside, both were very respectable. Mary was a good housekeeper, and Judas was one of the 12 disciples who was so trusted by everybody else. He's actually the treasurer. He looked after all the money for the group. But they were opposites. They were fundamentally different at the core. Now, you've probably been sitting there thinking, what's that box got to do with things? Well, let me have a little bit of a look. What do you think's in the box? Any ideas? Anybody got any ideas? Okay, well, I'll show you. If it works. I've got some oranges. I bet you weren't expecting that, were you? Now, why have I got oranges? Well, let me show you. I've also got a knife, but I'm not dangerous with it. Now, these oranges were purchased at 11 o'clock last night from a local superstore because when I was trying to do this demonstration, it all went horribly wrong and I had to go and buy some more oranges. So I can honestly say they smell lovely and they're very fresh. And inside this one, it's absolutely beautiful. Really nice. It's got a beautiful orange, clean heart. But actually, inside this one, it's completely black. On the outside, though, you can't actually tell any difference. But inside, it's completely black. Both were the same on the outside, and as far as we could see, but the heart of the fruit was very, very different. And as we look further at this story today, I want you to keep that picture in your mind, along with a verse that we can find in 1 Samuel 16. And it says this: "For God sees not as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. For God sees not as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." So if these two people who we've just been talking about, to all intents and purposes, were good people on the outside, yet they were completely opposite, it follows that their hearts must have been where the difference was. So let's look at them in a little bit more detail. What do we know about Judas? Well, one of the things we know is that he was one of the 12 disciples who was very, very close to Jesus. He had witnessed amazing miracles. He had heard Jesus talk right up close. Do you know, the times I've often thought, if only I could have seen Jesus, if only I could have heard him, I'd never, ever, ever, ever would have had a doubt. Judas had. He had seen Jesus. He'd heard him. He'd seen amazing things. He had been with him. He was really close to him. Not only that, but he was respected by the group. And he was so trusted by them. He actually was the treasurer. He looked after all their money. I think that's where the problem was. Money was very important to Judas. In this case, I think, it was probably his first love. Although Mark doesn't mention it, when you look at John's account of this same story, he singles out Judas as the one who protested the most about the supposed waste of money at the anointing of the oil. But I think we can conclude something else. Judas was very good at covering up how he really felt about things. He could have won an Oscar, The other disciples didn't have a clue he was plotting the arrest of Jesus. He looked and he acted as if he was Jesus' closest friend, his best bud. It says in Psalm 41, "Even my close friend, one who has shared my bread, has turned against me." He was so hard and so bitter that when the time came to betray Jesus, how did he do it? He betrayed him with a kiss. Normally an act of love and tenderness. What a bitter insult. Could he have done anything worse to Jesus? I think Judas is a very, very sad individual. When researching this talk, I looked up some Judas facts, and I came across this comment in a commentary, and it really rang true with me. It says that Satan entered Judas's heart, but that is because Judas opened the way. There is no handle on the outside of the door to the human heart. It must be opened from within. He had opened his heart to greed and ambition. Listen again. There is no handle on the outside of the door to the human heart. It must be opened from within. He had opened his heart to greed and ambition. We see somebody who had had such an opportunity. He'd been with Jesus. And what had he done? He'd thrown it all away. But what about Mary? What about Mary of Bethany, the opposite to Judas? Well, we know she was someone who served. It gave her great delight to serve her master Jesus. She did what she could. Some people might have said it wasn't very much, but she did what she could do, and she did it for him. She did what was within her power to do to serve him. And she gave her very best to Jesus. Not what she had left over, but the best. She clearly loved Jesus with all her heart. He was more important to her than anything else. We know she was humble. Again, in John's account, he recalls that she wiped away the perfume with her hair. That's a very humbling thing to do. She had a quiet demeanour. She didn't come in and make a huge fuss. She just came in, sat down at his feet, and anointed him. She didn't make a huge fuss about what she was doing. Oh, look at me. She just came in quietly and did it. Clearly, money was not the most important thing to her. It cost an absolute fortune, a year's wages. But she had an insight and an understanding that Judas did not have. How do I say that? Well, it was the Jewish custom that if somebody died a criminal's death, they could not be anointed in the normal way, in line with the Jewish custom. So what did she do? She anointed Jesus with the best perfume, knowing full well that this would happen, so she anointed him beforehand. At their very core, at their very heart, these two characters were complete opposites. But this isn't the only time that we come across opposites in the Bible. There's other times too. And if you bear with me, I just want to look at two more examples. And every time we come across this, human nature, you and me, would have judged the people very differently. Let's very quickly look at the story of the widow's mite found in Mark 12. It says this: Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few pennies. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all that she had to live on." And again, let's look at the story of the tax collector and the Pharisee found in Luke 18. It says this: "To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everybody else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, 'God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give 1/10 of all I get.' But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat upon his breast and said, 'God, have mercy on me, a sinner.' I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God." Again, in these two stories, we see people whose hearts were fundamentally different. Some had beautiful hearts, and some had love, but it was not for God, it was for themselves. They followed for what they could get out of it, and they were proud, just like Judas. Now, I watched a film some time ago that I would not recommend anybody here to watch. I'll just say that. I would not recommend anyone here to watch. It was awful. It was cliched. No, I wouldn't recommend it. But its theme was good, and that it told the story how a very shallow, arrogant, self-opinionated man was taught the simple lesson that beauty is found within and not in the outward appearance. Can we just have a look at the first slide? Now, the story is this. The man who was arrogant and self-opinionated had lots of girlfriends. None of them had worked out. And all he ever did was look at the outward appearance. And this hypnotist hypnotized him so that actually all he could see was what people were like inside. And what happened was he met the girl on the right. That's what she looks like, and that's what everybody else saw. But after he'd been hypnotized, all he could see was the person on the left. She was a truly beautiful person inside. She worked with children, she loved people, she was lovely. Now let's have a look at the next slide. He also met somebody. What he saw was on the left, but what everybody else saw, you and me included, was the person on the right. But this person was scheming and nasty and had a horrible, horrible heart. I think you can see where I'm going with this. You can see the principle I'm trying to show here. It was an awful film, but it did have a good point to make. So, turning back to our story today, what made Mary's heart and the widow's heart and the tax collector's heart so different? What made them different? What made one beautiful and the other hard and bitter? What changed the priorities so that they were different to those of Judas? What made their hearts beautiful? What made them beautiful? Well, do you know, I think the key is this. They had realized their own failure. They realized that they stood before a holy God and that no matter what they did, it was never, ever, ever, ever going to win favor with him. They could do anything. They had simply asked for forgiveness, and that forgiveness had been offered so freely. That's what made them different. It was real love for Jesus. They fully acknowledged how small they were in comparison to God, and that out of sheer gratitude and love, they wanted to give all that they had to serve him, whether it was money, time, their love. They were just filled up with love for God out of sheer gratitude for what Jesus had done for them. That's what made them beautiful. That's what Jesus thinks is beautiful. Look at what Jesus says about Mary Bethany. She has done a beautiful thing for me. Mary was showing the fruits of the Spirit, and it made her utterly beautiful in Jesus' eyes. She was showing love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. It made her utterly beautiful in Jesus' eyes. So if you had to put yourself into a category today, if you had to look at these oranges, would you say your heart was beautiful? Or would it be like the black inside, even though on the outside you look just the same as everybody else sitting here? Nobody else can see your heart, but God can. Judas fooled the lot of them. He did all of the right things at all of the right times. He said all of the right things at all of the right times. He fooled them all. He would be one that Jesus was talking about in Matthew 7. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. So, look at these oranges again and ask yourself a question. What is my heart like? What is my heart like? Is your heart like this first orange? Do you have a beautiful heart? Do you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with your entire mind? Do you get up each day and think, what beautiful thing can I do for God today? Do you go to bed at night and think, I'm sorry, Lord, that it didn't go as well as it should have done today. Help me tomorrow to serve you in a beautiful way. Or is your heart like this second orange? Do you look the same as everybody else? Do you do all the right things for all the wrong reasons? Do you say all the right things but for all the wrong reasons? Are you here this morning because it's something you've always done? Or are you trying to please someone else? Are you trying to do good things to win God's favour, but your heart has never, ever changed? You've never asked for forgiveness, and your sins have never been forgiven? Or, actually, is your heart like a third orange that I haven't cut open? One that if you did cut it open would have a beautiful orange centre, but if you looked really closely at it, you could see black beginning to creep in round the outside. You would have a heart that loves God, but little things have begun to creep in and are beginning to be more important to you than God. You know, the easy to justify little things. Well, just one trip here instead of going to church. You know, that type of thing. Remember Judas. The black grows so quickly. So as I ask the band to come back up in conclusion, I know it's been a hard topic. I think it's hard to face up to what our hearts are like. I think it's hard to face up to what we're really like. But I want each and every one of you to do something for me. You've all got a job to do. I want you to look closely at your heart. I want you to decide which category your heart falls into. And then I want each and every one of you to say a prayer. Every one of you. If your heart is one that knows God, then I want you to pray that God will continue to make himself known to you. He will. If it's a heart that has known God, but is growing cold and letting other things creep in, pray for God to make himself known to you again. He will. And if it's one that has yet to know God, pray for God to make himself known to you. He will. Oh yes, and there's one other thing I want you to do. As you start each day, pray this. What beautiful thing can I do for God today? Thank you.
This is the end of this message. We hope you enjoyed it. If you want to find out more about our church, please visit www.chowdean.org.uk. And please take a minute to rate our podcast on iTunes.